For me, I think leadership is leadership. I put it all together, but specifically as it relates to education, it's a matter of leading people in terms of the vision, the mission, and the goals of the particular institution that you're working with. When we talk about leadership, we're talking about, like in the schools, you're talking about being able to lead the students, the staff, the parent, the community. All those are involved.
Kind of encompasses all of those things from vision and mission to measuring outcomes and everything in between, and such as systems and um, processes.
Be able to create the conditions for effective teaching and learning, for students and staff to feel connected and included and a part of a school community.
Over the years, it has changed. To be honest with you, when I started being an administrator in 1984, at that time, schools were set up where it was the principal's way or the highway. You did what the principal says, and you didn't worry about anybody. It's not like that no more. New Haven, we adopted the Comer philosophy. We have teams. I mean, you got to listen to your assistant principal. You got to listen to teachers. At the high school, they have students on meetings. Everyone has a voice now. So it's a difference. It's a collaborative effort. It's no one way because there's a myriad of ways to teach people, to bring people along. So I mean, if someone's coming in business nowadays thinking it's going to be your way or no way, it doesn't happen like that. You may have a superintendent, you may have a supervisor, you may have some teachers who think something different. But I think with communication and collaboration, you can achieve the goal. But
pretty hands-on. um, I am out in the district as much as I can be. I'm out in the schools. I know the teachers, I know the paraeducators, I know the custodians, the students to the best extent that I can. I try to learn all of their names. It's a lot harder in this job than it was even as a principal. Um, I I like to make sure that when I'm making decisions, I understand how they're going to impact everybody they might impact. And I feel like the best way to do that is to be out there seeing what we do myself.
Um, I'm a servant leader. So Robert Greenleaf, he's got a lot of literature on servant leadership, and I really believe in servant leadership and the idea that my job is to find out what people need and get it to them. And like what those needs are come in various lanes. And sometimes the need is making a decision, being visible, bringing people together. Um, but generally, again, I'm about servant leadership, and I think um, there's not enough of that in education today. It's leadership is setting the stage for others to succeed. Leadership is not about telling people what to do. It can be, it sometimes is, and oftentimes a room requires somebody to step up to make decisions. But generally, a good leader sets the stage for others' success.
Really kind of thought I was just giving it a try. And once I started doing it as an assistant principal, I knew that I could continue to do what I did, minus the content area that I taught, at least at that time, um, with students and with staff, and just have wider impact in kids' lives. So that's really still why I do it.
I found myself over the years being placed in a leadership position. I always thought I had the ability to bring people together because when you're a leader, there's going to be some people that agree with things you say, and some people who don't. And some people you got to push, some people you got to pull, some people you got to carry. And as a leader, you can't get rid of anybody. You need to try to help everyone achieve the goals of what you're trying to do. No one's going to be blessed to have everybody on your team that they want. And so you got to be able to work with some people. And sometimes some of the opinions of people who are against you work out to be good opinions, and you got to listen. And it's the same relationship. I think kids should know that you care, that you believe in them, that you believe that they can be successful. The difference with kids is it takes time. I mean, it depends on what level you get them at. I believe all kids want to do well. They take a different route of getting there. I think all teachers want to do well. They take a different route. So you just got to be patient. And I think the main thing is, I would hope that anyone who I've touched their life, whether it was good or bad or whatever, that they understood that I really did. And I've had people come to me, you did this to me, but I realized it was for my best at that time. So I think that they care that you do things out of your heart and not necessarily out of your head.
I want them to feel like they were safe when they came to school in every way that means. They physically felt safe, they emotionally felt safe, they intellectually felt safe.
That I was fair and consistent. Um, that's a big that's a big one for kids, is feeling that, kids feeling that their leader is consistent and fair. But again, just that I cared about them. And sometimes that care is through discipline. I think we've lost that big time in today's society, that, you know, we think we're just kind of this whole new shift away from like consistent accountability. But I mean, I think generations, certainly it can change, but I think kids appreciate and respect consistent accountability, because your father, your teacher, your coach, accountability, discipline is a sign of affection in many, many ways.
You have to learn to be a part of a team. And in some ways, I think every athlete on a team, whether they're on an individual team, competing, for example, as a runner or a swimmer, in individual kinds of sports, or they're on a team like basketball, like football, where it really is an entire team working together. I think either way, every one of those athletes is a little bit of a leader in one way or another, because they're responsible for themselves as athletes. And there's also an accountability to the entire team. And I think it's a lot the same. You have to learn to work with all different kinds of people. You have to know that your way may not always be the way that is going to lead you forward. Sometimes you have to find that out on the field or out on the court or in the pool, wherever it is, and give a different idea a try. Um, you have to learn to fail. You have to learn to do better. Very similarly aligned with being a school leader.
I mean, other than quarterback, I played every position. I was on the line for a while. I was a tight end for a while. I was a defensive back for a while. I was a running back. I played defense and offense. That helped me a lot as I got ready to get into administration, because again, you know, unfortunately, you can't treat the math teacher like the reading teacher. You can't teach a reading teacher like the science teacher. Their brains are all different, and they're teaching something different. And so, when you go to the science meeting, you got to have that mindset. When you go to the math meeting, when you go to physical education. So there's a different mindset. Our teachers, they think a little differently. And so what helped me with my background is because I've done so much stuff, different stuff, variety. I really believe I can get along with a lot of different people. I mean, talk to a guidance counselor, talking to the librarian, talk to the custodians. You can't talk to the custodians like you talk to the math teacher. You can't talk to the secretary like you talk to an English teacher. It's all different. I mean, the general philosophy of being respectful and respecting what they do. I mean, there should be no small people in the school. Everyone's important. Some kids spend more time with the paraprofessional than they do with the teacher. Some kids spend more time with the math teacher or the science teacher. And so you got to respect them all. I learned to be consistent and be fair to everybody.
The best measure of leadership, or every year, my kids, we watch Remember the Titans, and I'm sure you do too. Denzel Washington's character, Coach Boone, is probably, I'd be surprised if there wasn't a leadership course somewhere in the country based on him.
Mhm.
I mean, just systems, um, pushing your athletes to places they didn't think that they were capable of going. Um, just leadership, taking risks. That movie's had a lot of influence on my leadership. I'm not even. That's not hyperbole.
I truly believe that all kids can learn, all kids can achieve, all kids can become successful. Unfortunately, in our cities now, particularly inner cities, a lot of our kids rely on sports and sports only. To be honest with you, music and hip hop and all that stuff is also moved up there to some kids who want to be rappers and all that stuff, which is all good. I think it's just a matter of finding all the kids and what they're good at. If they're good at writing, if they're good at reading, they're good at math. I mean, I made a point to get around to see everybody. If you're in the math club, I treated the math club just like I did the football team. You know, the math team had shirts, and would have math day in school, and everybody would talk about math. So I think it's a matter of just being bring. I think if you could find something that the kids like. I mean, when I was at Clemente, my kids liked being on the computer because that way they can learn at their own pace. I'd put the kids in the computer lab when teachers were out. They would clock a lot of time in there and do a lot of good work. Kids want time on task, and if that's going to do it, let them do it.
Well, I think having an athletic program is a non-negotiable. I think that it's a part of a whole school experience. And even if you are not an athlete, I think it's part of your experience because it's something that builds a community and a culture centered around teamwork and how to deal with loss and how to cheer on your teammates, how to help people up when they're down. I think athletics as a whole for all students does all of those things because it creates that kind of a community.
Well, you know
Uh,
what? I've been teaching this class at Quinnipiac for the last 5 years. It's a student leadership course, and I think there's leadership skills and relationship building, leadership, commitment, perseverance, hard work, all of these skills that are really critical to lifelong success. You can learn in athletics. And so, as somebody who was like an athlete and had some success, I think those principles, you can carry them out in all of your affairs and all of your leadership endeavors. So, but I think a big thing is, and you and I did a little work with this with like Empower, just, team building and group dynamics and, problem solving. I think, a lot of that stuff can help athletes and non-athletes alike.
One year, I told my kids they had to behave themselves. They were going to act right. Certain things, I required shoes and all that stuff you had to wear for graduation. And I basically told the kids if they didn't do they weren't doing right, we weren't going to have graduation. So I had made the decision that we were not going to do graduation that year, eighth grade. We weren't going to do no eighth grade graduation. Someone called the mayor. The mayor sent a staff member up and said we got to do graduation. So I explained to the kids. I said, listen, the mayor says I have to do this, but you need to understand that you're going to do this thing right. There's not going to be no dancing, howling across the stage. You're going to be very, very professional. And how it's going to work, we're going to do graduation. But if you get a graduation and you embarrass me, yourself, or your family, you won't get your diploma. And that's a big thing to them. You and I know it's not a big deal when you get the diploma that you graduate. But again, but the kids behaved themselves and they did the right thing. And so we didn't get the diploma as they walked across the stage. They got the cover, but they didn't get the diploma after graduation was over. Yeah, but again, you shouldn't be afraid of it. You just got to figure out with your team of how you're going to solve the problem.
It was kids could come decorate their cars. They're putting the universities they were going into. If they were going to college, they're putting their sports teams on, whatever they wanted to do. They were doing that. And the fire department and the police department got involved with us and, closed some roads down, kind of led them through town. And you get the idea when it was COVID, that was the only way to see everybody. Well, come to find out, there were a couple of kids that had some things that they had put on their cars and or trucks that were not appropriate and upset some people. And we were like, I don't know, 4 days from graduation. These are kids and they did something stupid, and these are, they should all be expelled and or arrested. So we do this investigation. We really look into things. We're talking to the kids. We're talking to we end up with parents and the whole thing. And basically what we end up finding out is it was only two. It was only quotes only two, but it was two vehicles. And one of them, it was their father driving. It wasn't even one of the kids driving.
Yeah.
And they were actually the ones who had done it. It was like, am I taking away, they've been here for 13 years, right? To graduate in a couple days. Am I taking that from them? No. And the principal and I, we made the decision together. It wasn't just her and I, it was other people that were involved and so on too. And it was like, we know everybody's not going to be happy, but this is the right thing to do for these kids. And what people didn't realize was that when we were all together, because the entire senior class, the principal, me, the assistant principals, a bunch of people were all together after this happened, because the first day graduation practice, I showed up and we had made a decision that we were just pausing and we were going to address this with kids. And the couple of kids that should have done some things differently than they did that day, got up and apologized. Not because we made them, but because they did it on their own to all of the other kids. But we know all those things, and everybody else doesn't know all those things. And
Right.
so when we let these kids walk at graduation, we knew we were really making some people unhappy. And, we showed up like fingers crossed that these kids weren't going to get up and walk across the stage and somebody was going to, yell something out or boo or, the like. And that was that. I mean, I'm sure there's still people that were like, I can't believe they let, those kids walk at graduation and didn't expel them. Well, sometimes, a lot of times that's not the right thing to do.
And I think, you want to be fair, you want to be consistent. And I think sometimes, you want to cut a kid a break. Now, I've always been the type like, hey, listen, if you can't make excuses for kids' behavior. And you see that all the time. I've always been the type like, okay, so I understand that he's homeless and I understand that he didn't eat today, but he called Mr. Cooper an effing a-hole. Like, let's go get him some food. Let's see what we can do. See if we can get him. Let's get him a new uniform. Let's see if we can help him. But he doesn't get away with that. However, in contrast, sometimes there's circumstances related to, could be like a special ed student who there are laws around like special education and Title IX where sometimes kids commit violations, and by law there has to be some sort of due process where that kid continues to get to go to school. And it's unpopular, and best you can do is just communicate with people, like the rules, laws, whatever. And that usually that's a key. You can't just run from the angry mob or hide from the angry mob. This is partly why, schools fail and leaders fail when they allow the voices of the most difficult parents to drive decision making, or perhaps, a kid commits a violation and that kid doesn't get punished because their parent is like the PTO president. You have to be fair and consistent. and you have to be able to make decisions that benefit everybody, not just a small group.
That comes from training. I think teachers, administrators need to understand that you need to listen to the louder voices. But when I taught the class, I would find a way to ask those other kids questions, not ask them to say, I got you. I mean, if you know someone can't read well, I'm not going to call them to read out loud. But I mean, I would find a way or some kids, as I walked around the room, I'd go to them personally at their seat and say, what do you think of this? What's the question about this? So you got to find a way to get everybody engaged. I mean, a good principal, a good teacher makes contact with every kid in the class at some point in time. No kid should just sit somewhere and never be asked a question or never talked to.
Manage the expectations of the loudest voice. And it's validating. We heard you, we hear you. And also, we have to think about what's best for all kids. You have to be out there and people have to know who you are as a leader, and know that anyone can pick up the phone and get to me if they need to, meet with me. That's hard. It's really hard in this position because a lot of times it's not necessarily what you ought to do. um, um, because, following a chain of command and making sure that people, talk to the people in the buildings that can actually help them, talk to your classroom teacher, talk to your assistant principal, talk to your principal, talk to the special ed director, or what have you. And so it's a balance as the superintendent of doing that so that you don't undermine the people working below you on the one hand, and on the other hand, make sure that those people that are getting to you, who very often are not necessarily the loudest voice. Sometimes they really are just someone with, an issue that no one has listened to. I think first, you just have to be really clear about who you are as a leader and what your expectations are for working together. And as a part of that, let them know that you're here, to support them. I'm here to support you, here to do anything you need me to do also. I'll be behind you every step of the way, as long as we're all rowing in the same direction. And I think you kind of have to be upfront. If that kind of like when I'm hiring somebody, if that doesn't sound like the way you hope to do the job, this you might have some different, choices to make, and I'll help you with that too. And I don't even mean that in a, I don't mean it in a sarcastic or a negative way or what have you. I think a lot of it is best just put right out on the table, right? We're here, hoping for a fresh start, kind of put it out there like that, this is, it kind of tells people that that there's a toxic team you're working with, right? On the one hand. And I think that's it. You set the expectations, you have those kinds of conversations, you stay close to the people. You make sure you continue to meet with, talk to, and involve them and stay involved with them in the work that they're doing. And if it is still not going in the same direction, the right direction, sometimes you have to help people move along.
Well, again, you never should be in that situation because from day one, you need to know your staff. Now, what happens is you start out day one knowing the staff. Like during the summer, if you're new to the building, when I went to a couple of schools, the first thing I did is I went and talked to all the principals who were there before me. I talked to teachers and got an idea of what's going to go. I knew where I wanted to go, but I think communication is the key. I don't think there's really any toxic situation. I mean, because people know what's going on. So I think it's just I think toxic situations. I find very few things in education just happen. I mean, it's something that happened. For example, if you have a teacher that's upset that a kid was suspended, they should know why the kid was suspended. But that wasn't the first time. They're upset because it's happened 5 times. No one said anything. I wouldn't be afraid of toxic situations. I mean, you kind of know. I mean, You can't go eat in the teacher's lounge all the time, but you need to find what's going on in the teacher's lounge. You need to go to the mailbox, find what's going on in the mailbox. Teachers like everybody else, they talk. You just need to make sure you talk to the right people. And so you know what's going on and try to nip it in the bud in a positive manner.
Those key people that are the toxic, you got to find out what they want. You can't avoid those folks. You got to help them. You got to put one of them on your inner circle. If you're trying to fix a problem, you can't leave off all the toxic folks. You have to have some relationship with the leader of the toxic crew because otherwise they're just going to keep at it, keep at it. So you can't avoid difficult decisions. That's the big one.
Be here for the right reasons. You have to be here to do the best that you can for kids and their families. And you have to really be in it. If, kind of have the saying like be all in or, get all out. If I'm doing my job, I'm all the way in it all the time. And sometimes that's hard, right? You have a family, so on, but and yep, I'm still here for my kids and my husband and the rest of my family as I can be. But I always say, and they kind of know this too, I get up in the morning, I'm working, that's where my head is. And I have a hard time switching that off.
I really don't know if I could name an initiative that I had that failed. Um, you got to understand in schools you have all type of kids. So I mean you're setting goals that are realistic. So it may be a goal, that 80% of the kids are going to achieve goal. Now, but you understand, you got like in my schools I had special ed kids. I mean, many of our tests they were not given in Spanish. So my Spanish kids didn't do well. I had a lot of special ed kids. But again, everyone should show growth. And so I would set a goal for the school, but I also would try to set a goal for each student and each teacher and make sure they know their goal. So, for example, if you're in the eighth grade and you're in special ed function on the third grade level, the goal may be for you to get to fourth grade. I mean, that's realistic for you, and that's acceptable. Now, that doesn't help me in my overall goal to get all the kids in school, but that's got to be coming to account. And the main thing, if you let kids know what the goal is, you let parents know what the goal is, what the expectations is, I think everyone wants to achieve the goal. They want to be there.
I think if you get to the point where the initiative has failed, you've and you then have to address it with staff and deal with the fallout, you've already probably made some missteps along the way. What I mean is, I wouldn't expect to be addressing it with staff after it failed, because if we're in it together and moving this initiative forward, things are not going well at some points along the way, right? And if we're all owning that work together, which is really what we should be doing, then we've already figured out together that it's not working. And so when I know that, I'm going to make a turn. I'm not going to wait for it to completely blow up and fail and have to deal with, the aftermath, because we're going to say, okay, we tried that for all these reasons. That's not the right path forward. Let's talk about what the right path forward is and let's start making that left turn.
Somehow somebody caught wind that we were doing these attendance homerooms, and it was perceived as extra work and other schools didn't want to do it. So I ended up having to have a meeting with the union. But one of the things that I said, listen, if it's not working, then let's fix it. What do you guys think would be better? But let's not make this a union issue and have it like we're just not going to do it. So I remember that being a way for me to kind of collaborate with like district leadership, union leadership, and then these counselors at Platt, like, hey, let's fix. We need to do something. So what do you want to do? And I think people are inspired by that simple question. We're like, hey, what do you want to do?
We have had a process of how students were able to enroll in classes, heavily dependent on teacher recommendation. When you look at the data and you see the same students year after year, are not moving from certain places. Or you can walk into, I could walk in when I first started, I could walk into a classroom and I would know that it was the lowest level class just by who I saw in it. Everybody's got the opportunity on paper, right? But having truly the opportunity and being coached into that opportunity to take a class that might challenge themselves, right? An honors class, an AP class, a UConn ACE class that we offer. That was and still is because there's still work being done on that. I just talked to the high school principal about this afternoon, as a matter of fact. There were so many structures in place for you to be able, as a student, to take a class. The gate was shutting in a lot of places. If we're putting that many barriers in effect for kids, that especially some that might not be sure that haven't heard that that's what they could do anyway, right? They already might feel like that's not what they can do based on what their experience has been. And then you put that many barriers in front of them, it's a lot easier to just stay moving forward in the path you're in as a student. And I think that has been a big systemic change. I'm giving the example at the high school, but it happens even not at the high school. It's historically only been a very small group of students that were able to do that. And the policies and the procedures that we had in place were making sure it would stay that way, not on purpose, right? I don't think anybody created, these systems to keep certain kids out of classes. Nonetheless, when you look at the data, it is what it is.
The problem a lot, but I mean, for example, downtown will tell you what book to read. Okay, there were some books. I mean, my school was 90% minority. You know, a large Hispanic population, a large African American population. So, but I never didn't do what downtown said. If downtown said this is the book that all eighth graders had to do, we read that book. But we also read some other books. So I had some time extended day and other times where I'd make sure that kids had some books that they can identify with. But I don't think anyone downtown, the superintendent, ever said something about that at my retirement. So Leroy did everything I told him, but he also found time to do other stuff. So I found the time. My school was open, every morning, every afternoon, Saturdays and Sundays. So we found the time to make it work.
Transparency, that's a really big thing, man.
Hmm.
I could tell you, um, even if it's negative, transparency inspires people. And I can tell you, I can think of a place I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where maybe the school climate survey was poor. And so we didn't even talk about it. Versus, I can remember being down in Stanford as the principal, and uh, we had a data team, and they wanted to audit the discipline, and they wanted my blessing, and I gave it to them because I wanted to know, like, let's do an audit. Is there a racial imbalance? Is there a gender? Is our special ed kids being disciplined more than others? So that level of transparency inspires, and that level of accountability at the highest level inspires, and I think that's a big thing.
I think accountability is crucial. It's very, very important, but you got to be consistent. I mean, you particularly in school, you got to be everyone has to know the rules and what your expectations are, and achieve them. And then if there's something goes wrong, some people can't not be held accountable. Some people are. You can't let some people come late and other people don't. You can't if you say lesson plans are due on Friday, lesson plans got to be due on Friday, and so forth. So it's just a matter of being accountable and making sure that everyone knows the expectations. I mean, I would tell people, turn your lesson plans on Friday. When you come back on Monday, they'll be there. If you don't have them on Friday, that's fine. Put them when you first get there on Monday. Put them in my box. I'll check immediately and get them right back to you. So you had the choice. You get it to me on Friday, get it to me on Monday. If you have an issue, just let me know. But everyone knew you can't have teachers walking around. I didn't turn my lesson this way. You can't have it like that. Or I'm not teaching today. Or I'm going to show a film. You can't do that. Because to be honest with you, what happens in one class affects the other class. If you go to one class and the kids teachers giving out lollipops, the next class want to know why they're not getting lollipops, or they come to your class, sucking on a lollipop. You want them suspended for eating candy, but they got the candy from the teacher before. So you got to be consistent. Either we're going to do it or don't. So I think I'm more about being consistent in fear. I always talk about being consistent in fear to everybody.
Well, that's a tough question in a lot of ways, right? Because a lot of times when we hear accountability as educators, what do we think about immediately? That the test score is going to be what it is, or school district's going to be ranked however it's ranked. But I think at a fundamental level, accountability just means every one of us is here to do a job. And whatever that role is, we are accountable to doing it to the best of our ability. Kind of the same thing as I see you said earlier. It's another way I would put what my non-negotiable is. That's what it is. I expect everybody to be here doing the best they can all the time, to the extent that that's possible. I think that's the way we improve. That's the way we move forward. That's the way we make sure we have the same sorts of expectations for the students that we're serving, right? We're all accountable to whatever that role we have at the moment is. If I'm the social studies teacher, then I'm accountable for making sure every one of these students is making a year's growth in a year's time, right? They're learning the content, they're learning the skills, they're learning interpersonal skills at the same time. Likewise, I have a different role now, but I'm accountable for an entire system and all the moving parts within it. That's what it means to me. It's necessary for us to keep moving forward. Without accountability, I don't think how do we know what's working, what's not working, what to keep doing, what to change? Accountability is a part of that framework. The further up you go, the less likely somebody is to say something to you. Even if they might be saying it to somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily saying it to you, no matter how, open your door is and how closely you work together and all the things that, at its core, those are hard conversations for people to have with somebody that is their supervisor. One of the principals who talked to me about having a hard time dealing with a certain individual that worked for them in their own building. I'm trying to make people adhere to certain processes, as you know, because you've asked us as the superintendent to make sure they do. And then once in a while, there are people that are usurping us. You may not realize it, but they are. And I can't leave the building like this. I said, yep, you're right. And I wouldn't have liked it when I sat in your seat either. And I actually think I'm pretty good at not doing it and making sure that, as I said earlier, like as much as I want you to know that, my door is open, not at the expense of undermining the people that I work with on my team. So I had to stop and, pivot and actually go back to the other individual and say, hey, I didn't realize, like, when you just came to me about X and Y, and, I thought we had already settled this, that you would follow the process here. And when you're talking to me, make it sound like that's already happened, and it hasn't. So from now on, I'm going to have to make sure that you're not the one calling me. And, there's a lot more to it than I'm saying right now, but it was really causing a lot of grief for this principal, because it wasn't just about this one person, and it never is, because there's always, like, whoever the group is that, thinks you don't know how to do your job, or, they don't ever like the answer that you give. If they find a way around you, that's what they're going to do. Right. And so I have to make sure that I'm not letting that happen.
Yeah, you know what? When I was the interim superintendent, I had the director of accountability was like a really strong systems person. And basically, she taught me, I'm always telling people, like, hey, she taught me to ask for help. She's like, it's one thing, yeah, you can bring people together, but it's okay to bring people together and then sit in that circle and say, just because you're in charge, you're allowed to say, like, I don't know what to do here, but I think together, the five of us can figure it out. And she helped me see that. And especially in a new role where people are sort of like judging you and sizing you up already. And she gave me the confidence that, and I think any new principal or any somebody in a new leadership role, the ability to be able to say, like, I'm really not sure what we should do here, but I hope that the five of us in this room can figure it out together. I think people are inspired by that when you show a little vulnerability and ask for help.
Okay.
I feel like we're moving so much. It's just not even possible to be complacent. You can't keep up with the kind of work that we're expected to do as school leaders now if you're complacent. So I don't, and maybe that's back to, kind of my leadership style that we already talked about, right? That's not working for me. You're not working with me in that capacity if you're you're just along for the ride. You're riding out the time, you're doing your best 3 years, whatever that is, this isn't the place. And so, as one of the things, back to, I guess I should have said, this is a non-negotiable before we hire anybody into a leadership position. Well, first of all, I interview every certified person, teacher, social worker, administrator, you name it. I'm the last interview. Like, and if it's one of the building leaders or a central office person, it's just me and them. And I basically say, I'm not going to be the easiest person you ever worked for. In a lot of ways, I know that, because when I call you and it's a Saturday afternoon, I'm not calling to say hello. I actually need something. I expect you to pick up the phone, right? I expect that you're showing up for events that our kids are at. Not all of them, but that you're doing your best. You're showing your face at a basketball game if you're not even, or going to multiple. You're stopping by and seeing them doing coding on a Saturday. Whatever the thing is, I expect you to be engaged, and you can't be complacent if that's what the expectation is.
I think I know I enjoyed it. And so like I made sure, for example, a lot of times on Saturday I would call homes. But I may call 10 parents who kids are doing perfect attendance and say, listen, your child's doing real good coming to school. Appreciate it very much. I may call 10 kids in the middle, listen, your kid missed 4 or 5 days. I may call some students, your kids are doing bad. So I made a choice of making I made a conscious effort to make sure I made contact with all teachers and all students. So they didn't, if the students didn't come, if a teacher was out a couple of days, I would call, maybe go by and bring flowers or whatever. But so it takes a lot of time on your own part to do that. But I made sure that I and my staff, we didn't have to be mandated. We know if there's something going on in the community, in the neighborhood, that we were going to be there. So the kids would see you there.
Stephen Covey, Seven Highly Effective Habits of Successful People, right?
Mhm.
There is one of the habit number 7 is called sharpening the saw. Part of the allegory in that story is like the lumberjack who's chopping down 100 trees every year. And by the end of the year, he's down to 80. He really doesn't do any, a year later, he's only chopping down 40 trees. And so he's about to get fired because he just went from cutting down 100 to 40. And he goes into, the story of this lumberjack. He goes to visit the boss. And an old wise man, the custodian, asks him, when's the last time you sharpened your saw or sharpened your axe? It's a really great allegory for just
Okay.
all the other things you need to do.
Okay.
You got to eat right. You got to exercise. You got to sleep. You can do all these other things, but you got to make time for yourself. You got to make time for your family. You got to make time for your wife or your significant other. And I think I've always generally been pretty good at that. Um, and that's been, something that I'm really proud of. I mean, I think when you see leadership in others, you find opportunities to fold them in. I think you can have, one of the things I remember doing at Platt where we created all these PLCs, if you remember, and we sort of created like 6, 7, 8 PLCs, and we let people sign up, and then you assign leadership roles. Ask people on the side, hey, listen, I'd like you to run this PLC, or and again, people are generally welcoming of that opportunity. So it's really a matter of like putting people in position to be successful and take on those roles.
As a leader nowadays, you can't do it by yourself. You got to have a team. So you begin to delegate some things in a positive manner, and you encourage people to step up to the plate and do positive things. I mean, I was kind of lucky. One year I had a person who was real good in math, so I took language arts. A couple years later, I had my person that I had was very good in language arts, so I took math. As a coach, it didn't make a difference with me whether I was coaching the lineman, the defensive back, offense. I could go. And the same thing, you have some people, some teachers that are coaches. You got to teach them about the other things that need to come about. It's not just about the teaching. You got to teach them how to talk to parents, how to teach how to talk to colleagues. So it's a matter of just finding the other things that they're not good at. So quickly as possible, they can become a solid administrator and hopefully move on in the ranks. It's no good to just you can't principal by yourself. I mean, the bigger the school it is, the more principals you have, the more administration you have, and it's important that you're on the same page.
We've done large scale things, like I was just starting to say, putting committees together. Anytime we are going to look into a new program, try a new initiative, decide on changing curriculum. We put a K to 12 committee together, and the majority of the people that get put on those committees are the people that aren't in the leadership positions, because they're going to get that exposure working with the rest of us anyway. On the same thing, they're gonna still have the same sorts of conversations. But at the table, when we're making those kinds of district-wide decisions, sometimes we're, piloting something, we're doing research, you name it. The majority of people on those committees will be people that don't have leadership titles. And I think that's one way, because then they're sitting in a room with me having these conversations, or with the assistant superintendent, the director of curriculum and instruction, and they are taking the work that we're doing together back out to their colleagues, including some of the people that are leaders in their building. And I've seen that have people turn a corner, I should say, to say, you know what, I never thought I wanted to do anything else. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to try to get that 92. Or, you know what, I don't know why I never applied for a team leader position before. This work is exciting. That's what I want to do now. It has probably changed the culture of the district, maybe most of all the things that we've done. At each level, I learned how to work with the faculty and the staff in a different way. So I see the work as the same work, just on a different scale. And I think, for example, going from teacher to department coordinator, what did I learn there? That I'm working alongside peers, and also trying to lead some of the work we were doing as the department coordinator, and do evaluations and some amounts of discipline, as we did in that system. And I had to learn how to work with people that were my peers in a different way, and still understand who they were and what would make them tick, what the right supports were that I might need to put into place. And I think at every level, as you go through, you are still learning the same thing, but from a different balcony. Because you get to a certain point, I'm here, I'm the superintendent now. It's been a while since I've been in a high school classroom. I've been in a college classroom, on and off over the years, but now I still have to, I had to learn the same thing going from being the high school principal to being the superintendent. Take everything I learned about how to lead a school in a microcosm this big and use it to lead a whole school district. And so I think every one of those steps was necessary to be
Role.
here.
I mean, as I went from step to step, I mean, obviously, when you're the classroom teacher, I shut my door. It was me and my students. We follow those rules. You get to be assistant principal, it gets a little bigger. You get to be principal, it's a little bigger. What you worry about, you get to be a principal. You also worry about the custodians. You worry about the cafeteria workers. You worry about the paraprofessionals. You worry about what time people get to work. You worry about the cleanness of the building. Those are all things that are added. When you're a teacher, you don't really worry about those type of things. So you got to take all those things in consideration when you're leading. That you're leading a myriad of people, and it's different for everybody.
I think we need more people to step up and be leaders, the kinds of people that think they're not ready or think that you know, it's not right for them because they love the job they're doing, like kind of like I said, right? I love being a teacher. I still do. But I think those are the right people to step up into leadership positions. When I was the principal at Watertown High, the superintendent there left, and there was an interim superintendent who came in, and I had just gotten my doctoral degree, but it wasn't a combined program at UConn, at least not at that time. And so he said, "You should be the one that's the next superintendent here." That superintendent kept pulling me aside and saying to me, "You're never going to think you're ready. People see it in you from the outside. You don't always see it in yourself." And then that's kind of what I'm saying to you about being a leader in general, right? You just don't always know that's you.